When did you start drinking bourbon?
5th grade.
Holy shit. 4 beers for $24, you know, and you've got it.
Sorry.
That's all right. So you've got 4 IPAs.
Quadruple bourbon barrel stout that is just fermenting in the fridge right now. It's going to be delicious with a steak.
Yeah, bourbon's a little more kinky than scotch. Scotch kind of make love to it. Bourbon, yeah, you can just have sex with it.
Like, hey, do you want a bourbon? Do you want a beer? What? And they're like, bourbon's a little, we're done.
Do you drink Wild Turkey today?
Sweet Jesus, no. You know why? Because I'm not 10 years old.
Right. Like most people who are drinking Wild Turkey. Welcome to Menstown. We're talking scotch and bourbon today. If you get a chance, hit that like and subscribe button.
Scotch.
Scotch. That's my boy Will. I'm Dirk.
Hi.
Hey, everybody. So if you came to this particular show hoping to learn about how scotch is made and bourbon is made, you're at the wrong spot. What we're going to do today is we're going to tell you a little bit about what scotch and particular kinds of scotch and what bourbon and particular kinds of bourbon say about you as a human being, as a man, because we're in Menstown. It's really about, it really dictates who you are as a person. It's not the quality of your character. It's what you drink, how you drink it, when you drink it, and who you drink it with. So these are the things we'll be talking about. If you've come for an education on scotch and bourbon, you're going to get one. It's just going to be a little more subjective than objective. That's all.
Yeah, you know, to steal a line from my boy John Cusack's movie, who stole the line from my boy Nick Hornsby's book, it's not what you like. It's not what you're like. It's what you like.
That's true. That's true. Is that high fidelity?
Yep, high fidelity right there.
All right, I thought so. I was like, that's a high fidelity when he's sitting on his like couch.
Yeah,
just kind of yeah. I totally remember that. All right, so Will, here's how we're gonna do it. How about you ask me some questions? I'll ask you some questions, and we'll go through bourbon and scotch, and we'll talk about it a little bit.
All right, let's start big. What's your favorite scotch right here?
So my favorite scotch is very simple. It's Balvenie. It's not Balvenie. It's not Balvenie. It's Balvenie. 21-year-old scotch. It's retails for between $350 and $400 a bottle.
It's not terrible. Not terrible for a favorite. That's not shamefully terrible for a favorite.
Now, I would like to say this. The prerequisite to that would be that's my favorite that I drink, that I have in my house, that I buy occasionally. I was just in Tampa with Jen's boss. We had a 21-year-old Macallan.
That scotch is old enough to vote.
And that was as smooth as it comes. And I once had a bottle of Macallan Reserve, which good luck if you can find it. It was a gift. That was ridiculous. So,
all right, why was that ridiculous? What made that ridiculous?
So there's a scotch as opposed to bourbon, I find, is something you drink. It's not as versatile as bourbon. Scotch isn't. I think it's a little more complex just in the way they make it. And I don't mean that in a snooty way. I don't mean that in a it's much more complex. That means it's better. Because I think somewhere along the way, I'm going to decide during this show if I could only have one or the other, which would I rather have? I'm not sure yet. So I think scotch is something you're not making an old fashioned out of scotch. You're not making a mint julep out of scotch. You're not mixing it with Coke, like a Jack and Coke or a Jim and Coke. You're drinking it basically, if you've got a crappy scotch and you want to put a little soda water in there, I'm not saying I'm looking down upon you, but you're probably not drinking the scotch that I poured. It's probably something you poured. So if you have a decent scotch, you're either drinking that neat or you're drinking it Little Rocks.
That's fair. That's fair. So I'm not a scotch guy, right? First out of the gate, not a scotch guy. But I can tell you the way I drink scotch is completely different than the way I drink bourbon. A totally different creature. You want to know why? Because scotch is more complex. Scotch does have more kind of a flavor profile. And when you drop that ice in there, or that water in there, it breaks it apart and it just makes it interesting and delicious and wonderful. So that's why I put ice in scotch. Well, my next question was going to be, how do you drink scotch? How do you drink scotch?
I drink scotch neat. I don't add a drop of water. I don't put a big ice cube in there, the big fun ice cube that you have with the whiskey generally. And Having said that, a lot of questions about Scotch versus bourbon would be, which is a whiskey. They're both whiskeys.
Yeah.
They're both, grain mash distilled, just in a little different way, but a lot different way, and in different parts of the world. But I would say when I drink Scotch, it's definitely neat. Now, if I've never had the Scotch before, I might add a touch of water, a drop or two of water, just after I've had a sip without it, just to see if it opens it up a little bit. But generally neat.
Would you say there's more variety in the world of Scotch?
As opposed to bourbon?
Yeah.
No.
Like more variety in the world of flavors is where I'm going with that. See, I think there is. I think there's a lot more variety of flavors.
Like, to me, there's two kinds of Scotch. There's very peaty Scotch. Okay.
Lafroig.
Right. Absolutely.
That's my go-to. That's my jam.
So we differ in our profile. There are, you're probably right. There are a lot of different flavors to Scotch itself. It's not as versatile as what I'm thinking of, but yeah,
not at all.
Yeah.
And I think the lack of versatility comes from the fact that it is so very, there are so many varieties of Scotch. There's so many different types. Like I'm thinking of like a monkey shoulder. Have you had monkey shoulder?
I have had monkey shoulder.
I like monkey shoulder. You know why I like monkey shoulder?
Why?
It's a sweet. It's sweet. It's treacly. It's nice. It tastes like bourbon.
It's one of the sweeter Scotches, and bourbon is generally sweeter than Scotch.
Always.
Scotch is more smoky to me.
Yeah, should be.
It's definitely more smoky than bourbon. Bourbon's is sweeter. Yeah, that, you know what? There's so many different Scotches. You can get from, a decent Scotch you can get for $80-$90. A better Scotch you're getting for $150. A really good Scotch you're getting for $400, $500. And then there are other Scotches out there, much like bourbon, where they're so rare that they're going to cost you $80,000 at an auction, for a bottle of it, or $50,000 for, the appropriate Dalmore or a Macallan that's just the right year, that's been, that kind of thing. That we're not really talking about that. We're talking about situationally how you drink it and what it says about you. So to me, what does it say to you?
I think that fancy people drink Scotch and bougie people drink bourbon.
All right. So define the difference between fancy and bougie for us then. I'd love to hear that.
So you're kind of a fancy person, Dirk. It's okay. There's no shame in that game. You're a little bit of a fancy person, and a fancy person has class, savoir-faire, style. There are two types of people who drink the Scotch. They're the people who have inherent class, and they're the everybody else.
I think it's what you just said is perfect, because you're sitting there with a zip-up hoodie over a Kentucky is Home T-shirt, and I'm sitting here in a cashmere zip-up.
You're fancy. You're fancy. I'm bougie.
Okay, so that's the difference.
I mean, that's it. I mean, you're fancy, I'm bougie, and I think that fancy people. It's not a blanket statement. I love Scotch. I'll drink Scotch all the time, but my go-to is bourbon. Right. Fancy people drink Scotch. What fancy events do you drink Scotch at, Dirk?
So that's a great question, and probably one of the biggest differentiators to me between Scotch and bourbon is when you're drinking it. So, if somebody that I care about has passed away, I'm drinking Scotch. If somebody that I care about is getting married, I'm drinking Scotch. If there's an event, a life event that matters, I'm drinking Scotch. Also, if I'm with somebody who appreciates Scotch, I'm drinking Scotch. Yeah. If I'm, and I hate to say it this way, if I'm at the country club, I'm drinking Scotch.
Drinking Scotch. Why? Yeah. Why? Because where are you?
I'm at the country club.
You're at the country club.
That's right. No, we're going to have some Scotch. What kind of Scotch? It's not even about are you having Scotch. It's what kind of Scotch.
At that point, it's not a question of what you're drinking. It's a question of what are you drinking.
Right. So we went to we were in Tampa, and we were at the JW Marriott, right? At the regular kind of restaurant bar, I had bourbon.
Sure.
We went to the rooftop bar. I had Scotch. sometimes you just got to go all the way, and I'm not going to go all the way with bourbon. I sit at the restaurant bar. I have a Buffalo Trace. Did I enjoy it? Loved it. It's Buffalo Trace. I enjoy it. You're not a fan. I understand that. That's fine. But I liked it. I like it.
And that's all that matters.
It was like, let's say somebody buys you a bourbon and you don't like it. I don't feel that bad about it, because you probably paid at a restaurant. You probably paid $20 for that bourbon. Unfortunately, you could have got a bottle for 40. But you got the pour for $12 to $20, something like that, depending on what you're getting. If somebody gets me a scotch and they get me something super peaty, I'm not a huge fan. I feel bad. I feel bad that they did it.
Well, see, and that's you're fancy like that.
Yeah. So if it's an event, if it's a life event, or if I'm in a fancy place, I'm probably drinking scotch.
You want to know when I'm drinking bourbon?
Yeah.
All the time, baby.
Yeah.
Tuesday morning with my Cheerios, bourbon.
Right.
Grandpa just died, bourbon. The only time I drink scotch?
When
I'm with a sophisticate who likes scotch.
When we're hanging out.
When I'm hanging out with Dirk. That's the only time I drink scotch. And even when we're at a bar, we'll walk up to a bar and you'll say, "Let me get the McAllister." And I'll say, "Let me get the Bullet." And we'll both say, "Double neat. Thank you."
I see, and I appreciate it. So that's a pretty. Those are good points, and it also. I would say the other thing that matters when it comes to scotch is where I am. What do they have?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a really, really good one. Yeah.
Yeah, because I like a 12-year-old scotch. It's a nice scotch. A Macallan 12 is a staple. It stays in the house, and I will drink that with anyone. If I'm pulling out my 21-year-old Balvenie, I know you. We probably have a cigar, which I think pairs nicely with both scotch and bourbon. We'll get into that another time.
It's true.
But yeah, scotch matters as to what's around. I can look at any bar almost and find a bourbon that I like, that I can deal with.
It's interesting. As a bourbon file, I can tell you, man, there are sometimes I walk into a bar and I'm at a nice bar and they don't have anything that I want. And it's interesting. The same reason why a lot of bars have a variety of bourbons is the same reason why they don't have anything I want, is because bourbon has gotten trendy in the last 15 years. And it's got a bunch of douchebags who are collecting it and ruining it for the rest of us who drink bourbon and don't collect bourbon. And I go in and they have a New Lose Special Tap Reserve bourbon served with mocha beans. And I'm like, wow, this is designed for somebody who thinks that they understand bourbon.
Okay, so that leads to me asking you a couple questions about bourbon. Let's go back and forth.
All right, yeah, fine. Ask me some questions about bourbon.
What is that, me or you?
That ain't me.
Yeah, that sounds like a little dog. By the way, if you got little expensive dogs, you're probably drinking scotch.
You're drinking scotch.
If they're just mutts, but they're expensive mutts because they don't shed, you're probably drinking scotch.
Probably drinking scotch.
Yeah, like we have 2 little dogs, and we have not had to vacuum up any hair in 7 years. So that means you are fancy, and you've gotten yourself a mutt that is expensive.
True story.
That's scotch. All right, so bourbon. It's tough to ask you questions about bourbon because you know so much about bourbon. Like,
I don't.
When did you start drinking bourbon?
5th grade.
Holy shit! Did you? All right, it's solid. So, how old are you in 5th grade? Is that like 12, like 11?
It's 10.
10? Okay. You've got kids that have been there on their way there, so you know better than I do.
Stole a bottle of wild turkey and went on a little camping excursion. Got fucked up in the woods. 10 years old.
Okay. So when I was 13, I had a cigar, and I had my next cigar at like 21. When you were in 5th grade and had bourbon, did that start the love affair? And from then on, you were having bourbon with breakfast?
I mean, I can't say that's necessarily true. I revisited the whole suite of alcoholic beverages through my later adolescence into high school, and then into
I can't stop laughing at fifth grade.
fifth grade.
Like I was expecting you to like bourbon is that's a man's drink, not a boy's drink. So usually, even if you start drinking, and I think most people have had a drink in high school. You're drinking Mad Dog 2020 or a 40 of Old English or Milwaukee's Best if you can get your hands on it, or whatever clear liquor you can get, gin or vodka, because your parents have that. You can fill it back up with water. But in fifth grade, my man Will is throwing down some bourbon.
Wild turkey, baby. Little kicking chicken.
Did you have a wild turkey nonetheless? Oh.
And it was the 80 proof. It wasn't the 101 proof.
It's still wild turkey. Do you drink wild turkey today?
Sweet Jesus, no. You know why? Because I'm not 10 years old.
Right. Like most people who are drinking wild turkey.
Most people drinking. If you're drinking wild turkey, that means you're either physically or mentally 10 years old.
That's lovely. All right. So you started drinking. You had your first bourbon in fifth grade. When did you fall in love with bourbon?
I fell in love with bourbon probably in college.
Okay.
And it was an easy love affair. So I was in college from 93 to 97. College. Mm-hmm. And
where were you at college?
In Lexington, Kentucky.
All right. So you grew up in Kentucky. That's important to know.
That's important to know. The home T-shirt was coincidental, purely coincidental. Just so we're clear.
So is the cashmere zip up.
Doesn't feel like it. Right. But being fancy takes time. Just saying.
Hey, you got to do stuff,
So college, man, like I waited tables, I bartended in college, and cater waiter, and did all the stuff. And when you're in Lexington, good liquor, like especially in the 90s before it got super super trendy to like bourbon, and before it became a fad. Like you could get a really, really sweet bottle. Like Pappy Van Winkle was going for $80-$90 a bottle. And like you could get a shot of it if you were feeling saucy for a few bucks. I mean, obviously inflation is one thing, but dunderheads is another, driving up prices. But that's neither here nor there. That's fine. It is what it is. It's fine.
Felt personal.
But I love me some bourbon. Became enamored with it in college, and as you will, I kind of graded myself up over the years. In college, I still drank myself I'd walk into the bar and they would put a Miller Lite and a shot of wild turkey right there on the bar for me when I came in, because they knew me, and that's just how it started the night. And then I moved on to pretty much drinking just a bourbon with a little ice in it, and then good bourbon with a little ice in it, and then just good bourbon. And by my mid-20s, I was just drinking bourbon neat. And if it wasn't good, I wasn't having it. I remember there was this time, and I was drinking a lot of Maker's Mark back then.
I remember when we first met, Maker's was definitely your jam.
Yeah, Maker's was my go-to. And I remember the first time I ever had Van Winkle, any of the Winkles, was...
Tell the people a little bit about Van Winkle.
Okay, so Pappy Van Winkle is this much rarefied, very limited availability bourbon that people hold up as the holy grail of all bourbons ever. It is a fine bourbon.
If I could be wrong here, it's like old Van Winkle makes Pappy Van Winkle, but Pappy's like there.
Yeah. So you got Rip Van Winkle and you have Pappy Van Winkle, and they
make a few of them,
different,
right?
Different years, different 10, 12, 20.
Right.
And they're delicious, man. I'm not going to tell you they're not delicious, but I'm also not going to tell you that they're worth paying whatever you're paying for them. So you got that hierarchy, right? You got the Pappies, the Rip Vans. Like Rip Van Winkle is like 10-year-old, and Pappy is like the 12 and the 14 and the 16 and the 18 and 20 and the 22.
And what does that mean?
Years old.
Like old. Like, so if it says it's 12 years old and I keep it for 2 years, is it 14 years old now?
I mean, maybe.
Or is that how long it's in the cask?
So it's in the cask for at least 2 years to be considered straight bourbon. And then it has to be mixed with, at least straight bourbon has to be mixed with at least whatever the oldest bourbon is in the mix. Can be labeled as whatever is the oldest bourbon in the mix.
Right. And bourbon has to be at least 51% corn.
Yes, that's accurate.
Right. And they do it. It's some kind of white char barrel. I don't know. I'm not expert on bourbon, but I know it's a particular kind of barrel
Yeah,
that the 2 years have to be in at least.
new white charred oak barrels
Okay, there you
that
go.
then, not interestingly enough, get
Mm-hmm.
shipped to Scotland to be used for scotch.
Right, because Scotch likes to ferment in a bourbon barrel.
Mm-hmm. So I mean that's I started drinking egg makers, and then as time went on, I discovered different, better bourbons, and more bourbons came into the market. And I used to be the guy who would only drink Kentucky bourbons, but I discovered Breckenridge bourbon, which is out of Colorado, and it is delicious.
I like
And
Breckenridge.
the trick with bourbon, man, is just because bourbon's from Kentucky doesn't mean it's from the good part of Kentucky. Bourbon's all about the water it's made with.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so the water in Bardstown, that area, is all it's all limestone water. It sits on this big limestone shelf, and the water is super, super perfect for bourbon. You go west into Owensboro, they still make bourbon there, but they're making it with Owensboro water, which is, for all intents and purposes, Ohio River water. And it is nowhere near as good. And then you go east and over toward the mountains, and they make bourbon over there, but because they call it Kentucky bourbon, but it's not really Kentucky bourbon because it's made with fucking water that's flown, that's been poured off the Ohio River on the other side of the Ohio River. Basically, you got to have great water for good bourbon, and most of the great water in good bourbon is from Central Kentucky.
Right. So a lot of that is similar to Scotch. Scotch tastes different from different parts of Scotland.
Yep.
And also how they make it, if they burn it, if they don't burn it, which is where you get your peatiness from, fermenting it. Which, it's funny. I say I don't like peaty Scotch, but I like peaty Scotch more than I like most things. You know what I mean?
No, I know exactly what you mean.
Like, would you like this fancy IPA because that's trendy, or do you want this peaty Scotch? I'll take the peaty Scotch.
Scotch is like sex. Even when it's bad, it's still pretty good.
It's still pretty good. Especially a single malt, which is what we're really looking at. But we'll get into that another time.
Well, and so that's the same thing with bourbon, right? So you want, ideally, if you're looking for good bourbon, you want to find a single barrel or a small batch.
Right.
Because that means that they haven't taken a 12-year-old bottle and poured it in a 55-gallon drum and called it 12-year-old.
Right.
You want a single barrel or small batch, and you give me some of those things, man, and I'm a happy boy with my Cheerios on a Tuesday morning.
All right, so bourbon is beautiful for a reason, to me. You drink bourbon neat. Mm-hmm. What percentage of the time are you drinking bourbon neat versus an old fashioned, a bourbon and Coke, a sour? Oof. Are you ever doing any of that?
I'll drink an old fashioned or a Manhattan.
Okay.
Because they're delicious, but I also recognize the fact that the bourbon has little play in that, so I'll actually just go with like a mid-shelf bourbon for those.
Right. But there's no need to go top shelf.
Yeah, not when you're mixing it with shit. So yeah, I mean, 90% I'm drinking it neat.
Right. And then old fashions in there.
And then an old fashioned, I'll throw an old fashioned in there if I go into a restaurant and they have a sassy little old fashioned with Veuve Clicquot and elderberry essence flowers.
Very nice. You brought up a good point. I think that bourbon's really having a time right now. It's really a bourbon time right now. It's having what's the word I'm looking for here?
An explosion.
It's an explosion. I think bourbon is a very it drink right now. Tequila is obviously there with it. Bourbon has been probably the past 10 years for sure. Tequila the last couple years. But it's going through kind of it's going through, like, I remember in the 90s when cigars were huge and everybody was smoking cigars, and that, kind of wanes. IPAs were this big thing, which people still love their IPAs.
I like a good IPA.
Yeah, but it's not like it was 8 to 10 years ago, even 5 to 10 years ago. Like, you were seeing hipsters getting an IPA that was like, yes, you basically are eating a loaf of bread.
My favorite are the guys who will sit down and write notes in their little books about the beers they're drinking. And I'm like, what do you taste of leather and cardamom? You put that shit in there.
I like that. It's a good mix. And to be fair, bourbons and scotches have notes of different things. Again, bourbon's a little sweeter. But you can taste them after once you get to know what you're doing. It's like wine. Like you definitely know a good bourbon versus like. So if you give me a Pappy, I'm not saying you're wasting it on me because I do like bourbon, but it's better for you,
I'm
you know.
saying,
Or if you got a very high end bourbon, and I know most of them are made by old Van Winkle. Like they make all the expensive stuff because it's hard to get your hands on it, basically.
yeah,
But
the
even like good
great
bourbon, like
allotment.
like if you're getting a Blanton's or Weller's or stuff like that, like I can tell the difference. But if you're going to give me like a special bottle of Blanton's that has been aged for 84 years and was made from the udder of a goat, you're wasting it on me.
Yeah. So let me tell you a story that happened just a few weeks ago. We were at a restaurant, and I wanted to finish off the evening with just a nice middle of the road bourbon. And as I will, I always one shot's never enough for young William Faust. So I always do a double neat. And I said, I looked over at the bar, and one of the great things about bourbon is the branding. People love the branding in bourbon. And Willet Pot Still has this beautiful bottle. And I see what I think is a Willet Pot Still bottle, and they bring it over. I'm like, let me get 2 of those and bring me my drink. And I drink my drink, and my wife pays the bill, and she's like, you know how much those were? And I'm like, no, what? And she shows me the bill, and they were like double weeded something. And I was like, that should taste like Bullet to me. I mean, like, I can't tell you that it wasn't, something special. And I can't tell you that somebody who had a better palate than Pam Faust Youngest couldn't tell you something better about it. But what I'm telling you right now is it tasted like Bullet to me. It didn't taste like $40 a pour.
But you like Bullet.
I love me some Bullet. Bullet's my house bourbon here at the House of Faust.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you bring that up because you said like if I go out and get a Scotch or a bourbon, I'm getting a double neat. But that's just my regular pour at home.
Oh, dude, I don't even know what my normal pour at home is.
Yeah, like I think a lot of people say you get 2 fingers. 2 fingers is kind of a general. If you're not a bartender or mixologist and you say give me 2 fingers, I know what that means. It means I want this much bourbon or this much Scotch when you put it in a rocks glass or a punch bowl. So. Either way you look at it, you're getting 2 fingers, and there's everybody's making I'll take 2 fingers. That's funny. But we know what that pour
my
is.
joke on it is when somebody asks me if I want 2 fingers, if somebody's bougie, if somebody's fancy enough, let me put it out there. If somebody's fancy enough to ask me if I want 2 fingers, I'm bougie enough to ask them where they want them.
Now I like it. Where do they want those 2 fingers? So now you've thrown in sexual innuendo into the bourbon and Scotch talk. So here's a question, and we'll get to a couple more things here. I have 2 more questions for you, and then we'll kind of we'll tell you what we think of people based on what they're drinking, kind of as a final thing. So first time you had bourbon versus first time you had Scotch. We talked about bourbon a little bit the first time you had it in 5th grade.
How about the first time I appreciated it?
So in your 20s.
Late teens, early 20s. Yeah.
Okay, so first time you had bourbon versus first time you had Scotch. Liked it? Didn't like it? Wasn't sure.
Like bourbon, like it's an acquired taste, and anybody who says they picked it up and they suckled it like a milk from a nipple is a lying piece of trash, because any of these things is an acquired taste. You develop a palate for it. Scotch took me a long time to develop an appreciation for Scotch. Like bourbon and I became simpatico pretty quick, but Scotch and it took a long time for that romance to blossom. And even then, we're very particular. We're very particular about how we make the sweet, sweet, sweet love.
Yeah, bourbon's a little more kinky than Scotch. Scotch kind of make love to it. Bourbon, yeah, you can just have sex with it.
Yeah. I mean, you can bend its knees behind its ears. It's fine with it. Just like roll with it. That's why that's the beauty of bourbon, is it's all purpose, man. Like
I love the way you answered that, because it's basically the way I would answer it, which is anybody who had Scotch the first time and said, "Yeah, I really liked it," they're lying.
You're lying.
Yeah, you didn't like it. Like the first time you had Scotch, it tasted like gasoline to you, kind of. You're like, people like this on purpose?
Yeah, the first time I had like my favorite Scotch now, which is Lefroy, right? Which is like kind of an extreme Scotch for somebody who doesn't like Scotch to like, right?
It's good Scotch.
It is a good scotch, but it's a big old peaty mess.
Oh, it's not. It's got lots of flavor profile there.
It tastes like naphtha and diesel fumes, and
But good.
but good, right? And so I love me some Lafroig, but man, like the first time I had Lafroig, I thought I literally was drinking diesel, and I didn't want to. I didn't want to drink diesel.
Right. No, I'm with you. So when it comes to bourbon, I'm not aware of any friends who don't like bourbon. Like if you say, hey, we're drinking tonight, maybe we're having beers around the fire pit or something. If I pull out the bourbon and say, anybody wants some? Generally, I have some takers. If I'm drinking scotch, generally I won't. It'll be like, oh, is that bourbon? Like, no, it's scotch. You want some? You know what? I'm going to stick to my IPA, or I'm going to stick to my Miller Lite. And it's like, okay, I get that. Like, it's not. I don't look down upon them. Like, oh, you don't want a scotch? I go, okay, that makes sense.
I define people by how and what they drink in any given situation.
So do I.
Yeah, I mean, so in that situation, if you're not drinking scotch, then like pull up your panties, Nancy, and head on home. The fire pit's closed.
Right, but I mean, if you're drinking a bourbon like a Weller's or a Blanton's, and I ask you if you want scotch, you're like, I'll stick to bourbon. Okay, that's different.
Okay, well, yeah, but
that's a really nice bourbon.
If the game is getting escalated, if the game is being elevated,
right?
If you don't rise to the game, then what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's like we're playing golf. We're betting $1 a hole, and then all of a sudden you're on the back nine. And it's $50 a hole. You'll have some takers. Most people won't.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
that also means I'm having a real good day at golf.
Be that as it may,
or bad if I'm the one who says no, I'm good. All right. So here's how it kind of in my world. Here's how I rank you drinking. Okay.
Okay.
So what I want to leave out is college.
Yeah.
Anytime college or before. So let's say you're a grown man. You're in Menstown and you're drinking and you bring over some drinks, which you don't need to do. I got them, but you bring them over because you're being polite, right? So if you come in with a natural light, we're going to have some work to do to be friends.
I'm asking why you bothered.
Right. Like
if you bring natural light into my home, like,
I assume your kids had a party and you caught them.
Is this a joke?
Yeah. Like, what are you doing? Like, I'm 47 years old. There should be no natural light. If you bring a Miller Lite or a Bud, I get that.
Because a lot of people,
that's what they drink. Yeah. Like that's just kind of their go-to. Right. And I get that. Like from a cheap beer standpoint, doesn't mean I drink MGD, as you know. And that's kind of nostalgia. Like it's a Miller Genuine Draft. It's kind of hard to find. Oddly.
I was going to say, can you get MGD anymore?
Yeah, you can get it at Walmart or Total Wine or Buffalo Wild Wings. Don't get the one from Buffalo Wild Wings. It's been in their cooler for 7
I was going to say it's been on. Definitely don't get it on tap because those lines are molded.
Yeah, it's what my dad drinks, and it's kind of what I grew up drinking with him. So I still like it. I've again, it's kind of like my palate has become accustomed to it. So, but I also understand it's basically Miller Lite. So you got that. Then you've got, to me, IPA drinkers. And these are, when I say IPA, that could be a firm stout. That could be a very expensive beer. It's 4 beers for $24. And you've got it.
Sorry,
that's all right. So you've got 4 IPAs, and it just cost you $250.
So
4 beers.
When you say IPA, you're not talking about IPAs. You're talking about any fancy schmancy craft beer.
Right, but I think in my world, if that makes you an IPA drinker.
Yeah, it tends to be an IPA beer is what you see in your world. Like right now, I have from I can't remember where, a quadruple bourbon barrel stout that is just fermenting in the fridge right now. It's going to be delicious with a steak. But yeah.
Like I've got a neighbor who hasn't had a beer. He drinks stouts. I don't think he's had a beer that was less than 9% alcohol, like since I've known him for 5 years.
Right, dude. We went to a tasting yesterday at Four Hands. Shout out to Four Hands, and it was their Madagascar release, which is this huge vanilla porter.
Okay,
and they do like it's for you. It's an IPA,
okay.
And they do like 4 different takes on it. Like one was like chocolate and almond, one was like orange and something else, and one was I can't remember what the other one is. but they were delicious. But they were this big.
Right.
I drank 4 of them, and then I was fucked up.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So that's where I go next. So I go basically, you're in college to you drink domestic beer, which is kind of go-to beers for everybody. And I don't look down upon those people. IPA, porter, is that what it's called? What are you drinking? What was it? Or anything heavy. I call them heavy beers. They're beers that have been made in smaller batches by local breweries, things of that nature. Those kind of people are next. Now, before them, 6 to 8 years ago, I would have put you drink white wine before fancy beer. Now I put you drink white wine after that. So you're moving up in my chart if you drink white wine, and I see it's like a really creamy Chardonnay. I get it now. I didn't used to get it. I was like, white wine, like white Zen or something. No, that's college. It's like it's Boone's. Or they even make boxes of wine now that aren't horrible. Like
That's actually true, man. That's actually true.
It's not what it used to be. So if you're drinking white wine, and it's a good one, you're next.
Yeah, I'll put a good white wine drinker above any flavor of beer drinker.
Absolutely. After that, I go with anybody who's drinking basically clear liquor. So a good vodka, a good tequila. They're not the same, but for the purposes of this particular thing that we're doing here, for this project, they are the same. So tequila, there's some tequilas now you just drink neat. They're delicious. We're on the rocks. It's not the days of Jose Cuervo, where you're just you smell it and you go, ugh.
Eat the worm, baby. Eat the
worm. So you've got that next, and then those who drink, a vodka soda, something like that. That's fine, whatever you want to do there. Or you're going to have a martini. Now you're kind of talking up. After that, I go with red wine. I go with like people who know a shitload about cabs, because those people are invested. And
those people like if you like, I love a red wine, and I have my own very, very small cadre of red wines that are my go-tos that I feel good about. But the people who are into red wine, like,
they know what's up.
Hats off, man. Hats off. Like you've invested time and money into this.
There are people that come over here, or I go to their house, and generally, if somebody says, would you rather have? We got scotch and wine. I'll take the scotch. There are people that know what they're doing. I'm like, I'll have the wine.
Yeah. It depends on the house. I will take
your wine. Yeah, it depends on the house. So red wine. After that, you've got bourbon people to me are next. Bourbon is and I'm not talking about somebody who gets a Jack and Coke, because that's probably where I started with bourbon, was a Jack and Coke. I'm sure I was in my 20s and somebody said, try that. And I'm like, that's okay with Coke. And eventually I started drinking bourbon.
I'm moving highballs beneath white wine, and I'm putting them above fancy beer.
Okay. So that's fair enough.
Like that's highball territory. That's gin and tonics. That's whiskey and Coke at 7 and 7. That's highballs go right there. That's
right. Yeah. That's a good call. And then you've got bourbon drinkers, and these are people who drink it neat or drink it on the rocks. Specifically, if you've got a big ice cube, I put you higher. I'm kidding. I think if you're just going to drink neat bourbon, you know what you're doing. Like, to me, you don't just come in and go, you don't order that. Or if I say, how do you want a bourbon? And you look at me and go, yeah, you got any Coke? Okay, you're down below with the highballs. But if you look at me, yeah, sure. What do you got? And you pick the right one. Like, if you pick my second best bourbon, you're in my tight friend group, because you didn't want to be so impolite as to go, I want the Wellers. But that's the only reason I get it, is to drink it with people I want to drink it with. You probably looked at me and said, yeah, I'll take Angel's Envy or Bullet or, something like that. I'll take your bourbon.
I would have gone straight to the Wellers, man.
Yeah, well, my best friend. So you should.
Yeah, no shame. I have zero shame in that.
And then after that, I have actual. This is a true story. This is how you know I'm a country club guy now. Actual champagne drinkers.
Fancy.
So, not Prosecco, not sparkling wine. They go down with the white wine drinkers, maybe just before them, a little bit lower Prosecco is than that. But when you're having French champagne, And if you've never had it, folks, it's a different situation. It is great.
Like, we could do a conversation around like champagnes. Like, I'm a huge fan of the Veuve, man. Like, I like Veuve Clicquot. I like Veuve Clicquot above Dom Perignon. I like it. I just like it better.
Yeah, Dom is the Pappy Van Winkle of champagne. Great marketing. Still good.
Great stories. Great stories.
Yeah, and a great gift. And then at the top of my list is Scotch.
That's interesting. That's an interesting take on it. So, I mean, mine's a little less stratified and a little bit, well, ruder. So, you come over to my house and you let's say I have my standard stock of stuff, and I'll base my opinion on where you go, right? So I have some daily drinking beers, right? So I'll keep a Yingling around, Yingling Flight for when I'm feeling, that. I'll keep some if it's around a Super Bowl and I have something left over, there might be a Bud Light in there. Other than that, though, it's like Yingling is about as low as it goes.
That's about where I go. Yeah.
Yeah. So then we got
I'll get a Modelo Yingling.
Yeah, and then we got some craft beers that are usually in like nice IPAs or something like that. $9 for a 4-pack.
They got words like juicy and stuff like that.
Hazy.
Yeah.
Some of those, and then typically I have a shelf of just like fancy, like limited edition beers that I bought because I felt like I should at some point, and have never really consumed them. I've kept them for years. They probably have now turned to like just a little yeast farm because they've been sitting in my freezer for 10 years. But I have them, and so I got that. Then I have a full bar, and I have wine, and I have champagne, and I have if I don't have champagne, I do have Prosecco because I don't keep champagne around the house all the time like I used to. But I do keep a bottle of some sort of bubbly around for all occasions because, you never know. And then I have a pretty full bar, right? So if you come in my house and I don't know you, and you, but I feel like you're comfortable enough to make a selection out of those choices, right? If you come in and you look at me and say, "Can I have a scotch?" I'm like, this guy is a swinging dick.
Yeah.
Right. Like, he's just come in and he said, "I'm going to bypass all the niceties.
Right.
I'm going to do all that. I just want a scotch." And I'm going to say, "I have Lefroy," because I don't have a lot of scotch. And if they say to me, not many people have a lot of scotch. It's just not my thing.
Right. You kind of have what you like.
Yeah. And so if that person comes in and they say, "I want some Lefroy," I'm like, "Well, you are a fancy person who I'm going to be friends with," right?
Giddy up.
And if you look at me and you say, "Not a big Lefroy fan. What else do you have? Can I have something a little sweeter? Maybe that Blanton's over there, or maybe the whatever I happen to have."
Right.
Like, not saying I don't keep Blantons in the house.
A Highland or a Weller or something like that.
Yeah, or he comes over and says, what's what else you got, and you drink a bourbon. I think you're good people, right? If you come over to my house and you look around and I'm like, "Hey, do you want a bourbon? Do you want a beer? What?" And they're like, "Bourbon's a little. We're done. Just don't." Like, if you're predisposing yourself to bourbon being too high octane for you to start with, or even consider, or put up some sort of vague like, "Oh no, I better not." Fuck off. I'm done with it.
Like, do you want a tour of the house because you'll never be back here?
Yeah, I mean, like, if you come over and you just start in and you're like, "I want a beer," later on I may graduate myself. You're TBD.
Right. No, I'm with. Or if the only exception to that rule is you're with your wife. "Hey, what do you want to drink?" "I'll just have a beer."
Oh yeah.
That's a different situation because that we all can relate to that.
I'm talking about like a party at where you are inviting people over whom you know and you should be comfortable with, right?
Right. Yeah. So I like the way you set that up because if you have a beer, if you have a Bud Light or a Miller Lite or something, I'm a Miller Lite guy, MGD, as we said before. If you say you want an MGD because you see me drink one, we're probably going to be boys. Because you're giving it a shot because I know you're a grown adult and I know you.
Right.
If you go with bourbon, I'm going to get to know you because, we're going to get a little bit, our edges are going to, pretty much get trimmed down, especially the corners of those edges. So conversation is going to be better.
Yep.
And if you have scotch, we immediately have something to talk about, period.
Yeah.
Like that's that. And then if you look at me and go, as we kind of wrap up here, is that a humidor? Well, now we're boys.
Well, see, there's that. So yeah, what's okay? So let's wrap up. I got a question for you. What is the worst scotch you've ever had?
So,
Like so bad it's memorable.
The story goes like this. There was on Christmas Eve, my dad, Uncle Dave, and I used to drink scotch. We'd have the 21-year-old. And we have that one uncle that every family has that was like, you don't really want to hang out with him, but he's not hurting anybody. He's fairly harmless. He's also not ever had scotch. He's like, oh, dude, you got Miller Lite. You got the good shit. It's like, okay.
Oh, that guy, yeah.
He's that guy.
He and I are never going to be friends.
No, he like drinks gin out of with a handle and a plastic bottle. So I remember he looked at us at Thanksgiving and said, oh, you guys gonna do that thing where just the two of you go and have scotch and your cigars? And it was like, it was almost an affront to us. Like, oh, okay, you fancy motherfuckers. So my God loved Uncle Dave. He's like, yeah, come on over, man. So he comes over. And I remember it was a cold night. We're out, got the heater on in the garage, light up a couple of Davidoffs, I believe. It was a good night for cigars. And pulled out the 21-year-old because it's Christmas Eve. And we, as we're pouring it, here comes, let's call him Uncle Buck. Uncle Buck comes in, right? Except for less lovable version of Uncle Buck. And it's like, oh, hey guys. And I remember he didn't know how to light a cigar. He tried to light it and tried to get a draw off the cigar without clipping the end of it. So he literally, there's no way to do it. That was the first thing. Second, he takes the 21-year-old and we gave him two fingers. We were, we kind of, when you're drinking scotch that's $400 or $500 a bottle, you don't tend to go too heavy on the pour. And you probably only have two of them because after that, your palate's done anyway. Yeah. So we took it, started sipping it, and old Uncle Buck took it and did it as a shot. So I remember old Uncle Dave looks at him and goes, hope you enjoyed that $38 of scotch you just had. And he goes, yeah, can I have another one? He goes, absolutely. And he opens a drawer in this garage in Menstown, the original Menstown. Shout out to Menstown. He opens a drawer and he's got Glenfiddich. It's a 12-year-old bottle. 20 years ago, and it had been opened.
Oh,
it was about halfway done, and he pours it.
It's more like Glenn fuck it.
It was Glenn death, and he pours it for Uncle Buck, and I look over at him and I go, "What is that?" And he goes, "You want to try it?" And I go, "I do. Like, I want to see what this situation is." So I don't know if it counts because I don't even know if it was scotch anymore.
No,
but
it still counts. Came out of a scotch bottle.
Yeah, that drink was it. That was it. How about you? What was your worst bourbon?
Okay, so this is a little bit of a switcheroo because I thought it was bourbon and it wasn't. It was. You were involved there. We were at we were with young Greg Buck at a place in Square. What was the square?
Canton
Square.
Yep, in Baltimore, Maryland. Yep.
In Baltimore, Maryland, and some guy was like, yeah, like like fights were just happening all over the place, right? And
right.
This guy, like, he tried to start some shit with you or Buck. I can't remember. Not Uncle Buck.
Greg Buck.
Other Buck.
Greg.
And then it calmed down, and he was like, "Let me buy you guys a shot." And I was like, "Whiskey. Let's do some whiskey." And so we go inside. And I'm thinking it's whiskey because I said whiskey. Nobody heard whiskey. He poured us shots of rum.
Oh, no. I'm guessing it wasn't like Ron Zacapa.
It was so bad. Especially, I thought I was drinking vodka. I thought I was drinking whiskey of some flavor.
Oh, yeah. Any kind of whiskey.
I got rum, and it was bad rum. So, you marry those three things together, and it was the worst shot of whiskey I've ever had in my life.
So your worst shot of whiskey was rail rum.
My worst shot of whiskey was real rum. That's accurate.